So good morning and welcome to Unit 3 of the course. By now you're probably getting used to the format and the routine. Again, I'm going to stress that if you don't have time to answer one of the activities, don't worry. It's really formative, and then we'll recap when we get together for synchronous time. So it's just to create an active learning format where you actually engage and you're being curious and you're looking at this, exploring this by yourself, which is going to be more conducive than if you're sitting in front of a video for 3 hours. So it is just avenues into active learning, into exploratory, into the material, and the activities are just there to create the structure. So if you don't interact in all the threads, you don't worry about it because we recap anyway. And hopefully it's a sort of two-way process. You explore in self-paced time, and then we recap together in synchronous time. So we catch anyone who's not been able to answer one of the questions. So as we begin today, we're going to talk about the two first, what I call umbrella theories, the big theories, two of the big four that you're going to see across fields, across disciplines. And I'm going to argue, and several authors argue, that you can relate anything else that you find within theory back to these four as being somewhat aligned or maybe aligned with a mix of two. So I'm going to put this back every time on my really ugly PowerPoint, but it is useful because, as I said, it's a compass. So we're not looking at in this stage at this because it's not inductive, or it's actually a deductive process. This is a case where we are starting with a theory, and at the moment we're looking at it right up there. One of these four that I argue are some of the largest scope theory that you're going to find, and that enable you to orientate yourself within the field of research and theory. Set objectives for this morning. We're going to spend some time. If you can do this at the beginning, you can do this at the end of the morning. Go to the media pieces and try and interact in those discussion forum. That's a sort of modeling because I'm doing this for half the week, and then you're going to have to do this for one of your assignments. So we're doing it progressively, and we're tying some of these into some of the theories that we're starting to identify and starting to talk about with specific terminology. As something we're doing as well is recapping on Unit 2 because you may have questions, and we'll deal with them when we get together. And then we're going to explore two of the major four large umbrella theories, positivism and phenomenology. Why are we doing two this morning as opposed to one? Well, number one is in the interest of time, because we only have the week and I have to try and give you as much of a broad scope view before we get into your own presentations, but also because you will see that they define themselves as opposition to the other, particularly phenomenology finds itself as opposed to positivism. Okay, so it's useful to do them together. For positivism, you're going to be more autonomous and going to the resources. For phenomenology, because it's a bit more technical, it's going to be more instructor-led. I'm going to be actually leading you into the topic. So positivism, what is it? So you have two resources. They keep appearing in the first unit because they're small, quite convenient texts. I've used them in class and students tend to like them because they're really concise and really summarize the essential. So you've got Taylor, Medina, and Mac. Not the best writing, but some of the best concise overview that I've seen. So you're going to be able to extract all you need from this in terms of what is positivism. And so you're going to be interacting on the discussion forum and telling me what it is. The second activity will be on the impact of positivism research design methodology. So every time we're going to just not look at the theory, but how it actually affects a theoretical choice. We've seen in Unit 2 that a theory informs and nurtures your choice of methodology. So we're going to do this together with the methodologies the theories that we look at as example. And here your second discussion thread for this morning is looking at what are the methodological choices that are directly linked to a choice of positivism as a theory. It's not too difficult, so you shouldn't have too long. And every time I give some examples as well to try and give you, not a full article, but a summary of an article so that you can see the orientation. So you have one here, longitudinal twin studies on the association between ADHD symptoms and reading. So it's going to be very symptomatic. I'm not going to give you too much information because in this first half it's active learning. You're leading the exploration, but you should be able to link all of your conclusion as to what positivism is and the second discussion thread too about methodology into this. It's a really good illustration of the kind of what that adoption of positivism as a theory leads in terms of style of research, right? The objectives of that research, the format of the research, the methodology of that research. It's a very clear link. So as an addendum, I'm going to do a discussion thread 3, which I don't always have time to do, but I think it's useful for students. So have a quick look at what is post-positivism, and don't spend too long on this, but try and find a quick sort of answer to this term that you sometimes see. Sometimes you don't. You'll see people just talk about positivism and phenomenology, but sometimes people, I'll give you a hint, it will help you understand the historical progression towards phenomenology. So have a quick look at what post-positivism is as a theory and how it defines itself. And then as a side question, when I looked at Sage Online, had a sort of encyclopedia definitions, and it doesn't tell you much, but so I've put it there because it won't help you answer the first question. But it talks about epistemology and ontology, and I think it's useful at this stage as well for you to clarify those terms. They can be about mind-gobbling, but you are going to see them when people talk about theory, so it might be worth at this stage also defining them for ourselves. And then we will put them in the course glossary as well, which I will keep adding to as we go forward. Okay, so this, you probably paused the video by now and you've probably gone and done the whole activity on positivism, but I'm going to carry on because and do it all in one video, and I'm going to talk to you about phenomenology. And so this is a little bit more instructor-led. So why is it introduced here? Again, because it really sees itself as an anti-positivism. And sometimes, to avoid confusion, it's called an interpretivist paradigm, or sometimes it's called interpretivism. So you'll see both. And the reason why people sometimes choose interpretivism, I'm going to explain to you why it's simple. In my view, I think it's because phenomenology is used both in terms of theory and it's also a methodology. And often it's a theory that is directly linked to a methodology of the same name, but not necessarily. So you can work in phenomenology as a theory, and then you could choose another methodology in terms of application. So I think to avoid the confusion, because the term is used in two completely different contexts, a lot of people prefer to talk about interpretivist theory rather than phenomenological theory. But it is a theory as well, and it's used in that. So get used to seeing the word used in a confusing way. So the basic premise of phenomenology is that reality is not seen as universal and shared, but rather it's subjective and it's grounded in individual experiences and perceptions. Now, you might think this is a bit of a shock. So a lot of your students often feel a bit pushed back by that. What do you mean there's not one reality? Well, obviously, phenomenologists are not arguing that if you're an engineer building a bridge, there is one reality that is universal in terms of the principles of physics. So they're not contesting the pertinence of talking about one universal reality when we talk about physical term or when we talk about natural sciences. But they're saying that when it comes to us in social sciences, that term is not as relevant. And I'll give you an example. If you talk about the introduction of Padlets in classrooms, that's your phenomena. It is going to be very difficult to talk about universal reality, about the introduction of Padlets in classrooms, and to talk about universal principles or universal sort of a truth that you're trying to reach. Because in fact, if you approach that phenomena with different perspectives and with different theories, you are going to arrive at something different. So if you're looking at teachers' perceptions of the introduction of tablets in a classroom, you're probably going to use a certain theory and a certain perspective, and you're going to reach certain key features and trends. If you look at a student's perspective of the introduction of tablets and in classrooms, you're probably using a very different theory, and then you're probably going to highlight very different trends, very different principles, and they are pertinent. So in other fields than positivism, we don't talk about validity, but we'll talk about pertinence, richness, relevance to the field, right? And that definitely is there. And then if you look at parents and communities' perspective on the introduction of tablets to the classroom, you are yet going to use another theory, and you are probably going to highlight the very different trends and key features. And those will also have relevance and pertinence to the field. So there you are, three different realities that are subjective, they are constructed by the stakeholder that you're looking at, and you are highlighting by really focusing on a different sort of perspective. And that's what phenomenology basically argues, is that the perspective of each individual is going to shape the reality which they're building. Okay, so it's a very strong sort of eureka moment for a lot of people, because it frees you in social science to say, okay, we are working towards one universal result. Well, we're not. We're acknowledging that depending on the stakeholder that we're looking at, that stakeholder is going to build a sense of reality around their lived experience. And more than a sense of reality, they are going to build a subjective reality that is worth exploring and assessing and examining and studying for its in its own right. So you've got a quote there from Trinidad, Stocks in Trinidad. The goal of phenomenology is to study how people make meaning of their lived experience. And you're going to see this used a lot, and I like that expression in phenomenology. We talk about meaning making, right? Meaning making, because that's what it is. Your lived experience means that people create order when there isn't and create a meaning in situations that other people might construe differently and attribute different meaning to. For us, it's very important because in education we have multiple stakeholders, and you will see that the phenomenological sort of position of these stakeholders is rarely the same, and so therefore we end up with different realities on the same phenomena as I've just described. So within phenomenology, you're going to hear a lot about hermeneutics, and that is almost like the most purest form of phenomenology. There are various types of phenomenology, but the one that has been historically the most important and the one that is you're going to encounter a lot is hermeneutics. So pure phenomenologists are sometimes called hermeneutics. Hermeneutics is a theory that focuses specifically on the individual discourse as a source of individual meaning making, which means that hermeneutics are really going to be interested in the lived experience of one person. They're not even going to be bothered about saying, okay, there's a group here that has similar experience. We want to explore that lived experience. You know, a phenomenological, general phenomenological approach could be, for example, you're looking at the lives of students with ASD in elementary classrooms on PI. That's a phenomenological approach. But hermeneutics is going to go beyond that. And I had students in another course, Intuit Research, who had come up with a research question, which was hermeneutics. She was in a school dealing with a student who, in a rural school, dealing with a student who is on the spectrum and who is gender fluid. Right. And so when you get into that level of individual context, when really there's a few people that are actually experiencing the same thing and you're focusing on their discourse, you're going to be working within hermeneutics. So you're not even saying that that has relevance necessarily to others, but you're saying that that discourse, that subjectivity in itself is worth exploring because it opens certain windows for us to understand how the field works and what happens in our classroom. So it's not even necessary to have two people's discourse, one will be enough, and each individual discourse is worth exploring as a unique source of narrative. So here again, when I'm going to ask you later what are the impact on methodology, you're going to have a lot to discuss here because one single person's discourse is going to be sufficient. If you're interested in hermeneutics, Heidegger, German philosopher, is the founder of hermeneutics, and so therefore has a huge influence on phenomenology. You're not going to be digging into Heidegger discourse because it's first of all it's in translation, it translates badly, and also there are huge volumes. It's a lifelong journey. If you're interested in Heidegger, go little steps at a time. I've given a video which is already quite heavy going, but it still is a good introduction in the sense that you'll probably get about half of it, but you'll get the essence. And then if you went into the real text, it would be very, very heavy. But you're going to find a lot of summaries, a lot of websites on Heidegger that are going to give you the essence of that. So a bit more on hermeneutics. It's a philosophical approach which focuses on interpretation of individual discourse. I'm repeating myself a little bit. Through discourse and text analysis, hermeneutics such as those of Heidegger seek to gain an existentially understanding of subjective experience as they're verbalized by the individual. So as you see, discourse and discourse analysis is going to be very important in hermeneutics. You again, this is going to have a direct impact on your methodological choices if you are working within Heideggerian hermeneutics as a theory. So Heideggerian hermeneutics rejects positivisms and methodologies which purport to uncover an objective reality and argue that such processes simply do not offer researchers the means to explore and understand and analyze the subjectivity of human experience. So as I said, they really set themselves as a full rejection of positivism and a full sort of assertion that really reality for us in social sciences is inherently subjective, inherently individual, and that is a worthwhile journey in science as a scientist. So I will let you look at the details of what phenomenology means in terms of the research design and methods. I'm going to open a discussion forum for that. What I will tackle here is the pros and cons. So it's connected to it somehow, but once you've done the full repercussions in terms of methodology, it will link in with the pros and cons. So in terms of pros, conclusions and outcomes are immediately relevant to the field, or even to that group, or even to that individual. So there's a lot of triangulation going back to the person you're working with, because all the research you're doing is directly relevant to that person or that group. Motivations, behaviors are understood and explored even when they are not explained. So it's accepting meaning making even when you don't have a causal element about that meaning making. We're not that interested about why is that person construing reality in this way. We just think that the fact that they're construing reality in this way has an impact in us understanding what happens in the field. For us, particularly, what happens in a classroom. And some of the cons, there's a lot of cons. Phenomenology can become excessively locked into subjectivity of individual experiences. So, so that frustrates some people, that you can work on a thesis, for example, PhD thesis, and that's only relevant to a group of very small group of people. That depends on your worldview, but for some people, it is frustrating. Conclusion, existential phenomenology depends largely on a particular participant chosen for the study. Again, so very little relevance. And is almost that accidental, right? You chose that person, therefore you're getting to these results. You chose someone else and you get into other results, which can be frustrating. Targets the individual perceptions. It is usually requires that the participant is locked in specific instant on specific experience. So in terms of temporal sort of relevance, it also can be very locked in the moment, and that people criticize it sometimes, right? It's not just that individuals, but it's that individuals in that context, in that conjuncture, they're meaning making in this way. But maybe in a year's time, they will actually have a different thought process and they'll be construing a different reality. So that can frustrate people, like the sort of limitations in terms of duration and relevance in terms of duration. And then the starting point of Heideggerian hermeneutics, the fact that experience is singular, unique, intangible, ephemeral, that can be problematic for a lot of people. And this creates a difference here with what we call social constructionism. So you're starting to really break down, but within hermeneutics, you would then have social constructionism, which argues that yes, experience is constructed subjectively, but for them, it's at least interesting if you look at a community rather than an individual. So it's sort of compromise, right? Still phenomenology, but now looking at society and groups and communities as a whole rather than looking at individual experiences. So social constructionism, it's still phenomenological. It's a subcategory, it is spoken of, but it really would be looking at the subjective reality that groups, communities, or even societies are creating together in terms of creating meaning. Where are we now? So before we close off, that's it. I know it's a bit heavy, but that's it. I want to connect phenomenology to existentialism. So I'm going to ask you to think, what is existentialism? Existentialism is not a theory, it's a philosophy. And because it's a philosophy, you may have seen it in other fields. So it's very present in the arts, very present in theater, very present in novels, very present in visual arts. So try and explain. I'll open a discussion forum for this, and try and give me as much information as to your personal experiences with existentialism and how you think it connects to phenomenology, because it does, and it's important at your level. I think it helps you understand phenomenology better if you connect it right away with existentialism. It's also going to give you lots of illustrations because, as I said, you're going to see existentialism in novels and plays, so you may have encountered it, you may have already a feeling for it, and then if you're able to connect it to phenomenology, it's going to help you. So what is that connection and how is existentialism described or defined? If you put that in the discussion thread, which I will create for that, we will recap together at 4:30 and clarify that link and explain existentialism for those of you who've never encountered them. Then I'm giving you two examples. This is just for your own use. Again, illustrations of seeing this in practice, but it will feed into your reflection on the choice of methodologies, which we do when we are looking at phenomenology. And you have a second one here. So the first one looks at the experience of mothers who are refugees. Oh no, they're not refugees. I think that it is in Iran, but they're working in a global South country. So women, mothers in a global South country that have students with learning disabilities. So the intersection of culture and experience with children's diagnosis, and looking specifically at that sort of conjuncture, and looking, obviously you've got it here, at mothers experiencing stressful time of their lives. So the interest here is really looking at their construction of reality during that very specific sort of transition of their temporal sort of anecdotal moment of their life. And this one talking more in a group, looking at youth that sort of identify as being hardcore. And this is, I think, a Canadian study, but you get enough from the abstract that they have an example of how it functions. And then we are going to work with the vignettes. So you have a list, a document which has abstracts, and they are either positioned in positivism or in phenomenology. So try and spend at least an hour doing that. It's not easy. I've done this many times in class, and I think it's going to really reaffirm your understanding of both. Why is it not easy? Because my experience is that students tend to look at the methodology and try to answer the question from the phenomenological point of view, but it's not going to give you the answer. Behind the phenomenology, you really have to reread the abstract several times and try to understand what is the positioning of the author, what are they trying to do, and how does theory fit there. Is it positivism? So is it trying to look at universal principles that have validity, that are transferable, that are accepted by everyone? Or is it phenomenology because it is actually trying to focus on lived experience of a few people because of its richness and pertinence to that group of people? So try and see, but go beyond the methodologies and look at the theories. Because really, if you're guiding yourself blind, if you're looking at the methodologies, you should look at the theories, because then the theories guide the methodologies, right? So you can make mistakes if you just simply limit yourself to the methodologies. Really try and look at the big overall objectives. What is that author trying to do? Is it in terms of universal principles that will appeal to everyone and are transferable to different people? Or is it in terms of actually accepting that subjective meaning making and focusing on that? And then we'll recap together at 4:30. And then you've got resources. And on Moodle, in the reading section, I've combined them alphabetically, but here they're broken to help you. They're broken into two. So you've got the readings that could help you for positivism. And again, these are the ones that we've encountered several times. Pecker's new, but Mack and Taylor you keep seeing. And in this one, you have a bit more new readings, and you've got library links to them. If you this one library link and this one as well, I think. Or sometimes they're just direct open access links. Again, you may not have time to do any of that reading today. Mac and the Mac and the Taylor Medina, you will have time, but the rest is pretty heavy. But you may want to flag all this and come back to it. So enjoy the afternoon, work proactively on all this, try and do the practical exercise at the end, if you can give it at least an hour, and then we will meet at 12 to recap. Okay, thanks and see you later.